I'm excited because every one of you is probably thinking you've got 4 assessments that are due in the next week or 10 days. Is that right? Hello?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. All right. So I know what's on your mind. So let's see how we can help you tonight, especially with those assessments. I want to go over, there's some new material, but we want to make sure we understood what we learned from Andy last week, especially with regard to logistics. So I'm just going to give a quick week 1 to week 11 recap tonight, but also we're going to go through questions in the class. And it's important that we, everyone have a chance just to write something in that questionnaire. This is not a test. If you write the wrong thing, then you don't get a score. It's not about that. It's about doing something, doing some activity. So let's enable the live transcript. We'll see if the technology picks up my accent appropriately. So we'll see on that one. All right. So I want to do a quick week 1 to week 11 recap. And the reason is, hello. Okay. The reason is that I want you to you need to make a judgment about, has this been practical for you? So what did we cover in week 1? Hello? What did we cover in week 1?
The macro.
No one's talking.
Macro shifts.
Macro shift. Okay, we've got 2 in the class. Macro shift. What did we cover in week 2?
Sourcing shift.
Sourcing shift, yes. All right. And so we tracked 132 companies, which is coming out in a KPMG report. But that doesn't finish there because we've found another 19 companies. This is only publicly available. The iceberg is big that we can't get access to. So we're up to 150 companies now. It just keeps growing. So it's ongoing. All right. So that was week 2. But why did we look at the sourcing shift in week 2? What was it? So why do I waste your time talking about that? Anyone?
We talked about how the sourcing from China shifted to Vietnam.
And then week 3 was the guest lecture from Vietnam.
Ah, that's right. So we started to pick out particular countries, right?
Yeah.
So we had guest lectures from where?
Vietnam, India.
Vietnam and India, right?
Yes.
Yeah, we had Megla. We had, who did we have from Vietnam?
Oh, beautiful lady. Jacob.
Jacob. Mike.
Jacob. Jacob, yeah, we all know Jacob, all right? So, and Jacob's been very helpful, very supportive of the class because this is second year he's done that for us.
Jacob, yeah.
And Megla's same. All right, so that's what was really important, was to show you that, okay, China isn't the only game in town when it comes to sourcing. Vietnam is now a game in town. India, actually in the next decade, is probably going to be the bigger game in town. And I haven't been to India. Maybe some of you have, and some of you are from India. Then you know more about that than me. But we had Megla in to talk about that. But what we knew from that sourcing shift was the one big takeaway from the sourcing shift with regard to India compared to Vietnam. What was it? Quick.
Sorry, what was that?
Pardon?
What was the question?
What was the question? What was the big difference between India and Vietnam? What was the big difference in the attraction? What was the data saying?
Is it the trade policy?
policies.
Infrastructure.
I remember that because India was tougher.
Infrastructure.
Which one was attracting the large firms?
Vietnam.
Vietnam.
No.
India.
Sorry, you know, when they teach you to be a teacher, right? You never yell out at students, say that they're wrong like that, right? Right? But I'm always on the knife edge, so you don't mind me yelling out no. No, it was India. India. All right. India attracted fewer sourcing ships than Vietnam, but each of those sourcing ships were much larger. All right. So the thing I want you to take away was that if you're an SME or a startup, it's much easier to go to Vietnam than India. There was more regulation, compliance requirements and things like that set up in India, and challenges with logistics, infrastructure that probably is more amenable for a large multinational to enter than an SME. Okay, so, and I said that's a big positive for India. Why? Because when you get these big FDI going into a country, when Apple wants to go to India, it creates much more surround an ecosystem than a little Rombo vacuum cleaner going to India. You with me? All right. So that's a good thing for India when you've got all these things happening, because we want the infrastructure to get better and stronger in the next decade. All right. So India is the big game in town, and that's something that we're going to spend more time on. But the other thing you can think about in the future, okay, India's under the spotlight now because attracting more. Vietnam's under the spotlight because attracting more. One thing we haven't talked about was, what about ESG? All right. So if we talk about ESG, what am I talking about with ESG? What does that mean? Environmental, social
and governance.
Governance, exactly. Good. All right. So then the question becomes, okay, where's India with respect to this compared to China or compared to Vietnam? I don't have an answer for that, but that's something you can think about. Okay, that's something that, all right, if India is the next China and Vietnam's the next thing, next small China, you know, the China +1, then where are those countries on ESG? So that's something that's going to get much more attention, because where FDI goes, so does the social conscience of the world goes. What do I mean by social conscience of the world? I'm talking about NGOs, all right, like the Mekong Club, all right, modern slavery, okay. I'm talking about consumers, all right, because they worry about the brand name and they're conscious on that. And I'm talking about government, all right, regulation, okay. And so these are things that are going to put a spotlight on, okay, how does Vietnam treat its workers? Okay, how does India treat its workers? So these things are just going to be challenges going forward. Actually, every developing country has these challenges. Okay, all right. So if we look at what I talked about in week 3, we looked at the supplier challenge. All right, you can see here on the PowerPoint slide. That is, if we want to negotiate, then we need to understand what is in the what. What was the big word we talked about in week 3? Starts with M. Four letters. Come on, everyone, online. Starts with M.
M.
Yeah, something to do with a supplier. The M. D.
Management?
No, close. Come on. Mind, the mind of the supplier, right? You can't be an effective negotiator if you don't understand the mind of the person you are negotiating with. And that goes for a company, that goes for a country, right? All right. The mind, if you understand what's in their mind, then you're going to make less mistakes in negotiation. And the biggest mistake that a lot of companies make, especially Western companies, is, you're offering it to me for 20. How about I want to only pay 18. Let's split the difference. let's do 19. Is that a deal? And then the supplier will say, okay, no problem. But then what you don't know, because you don't know the mind of the supplier will go and shortchange you on yell it out. Sand. All right. Okay. And what was the other one? Fire. All right. They'll shortchange you on lower quality materials. All right. They'll shortchange you on speeding up the process and there may be more errors. Why? Because you gave the supplier 19 when they wanted 20. You with me here? So you cannot win by just negotiating on price alone. That was the big thing I wanted to take away week 3 and week 4. All right. And so that's where we move from structuring the relationship, going through to getting a request for quotation. And I think this is probably one of the most practical elements of this unit, the request for quotation. And you had to go and do that. How does that help you? That helps you because when you go for a job in the future, maybe it's in procurement, in supply chain, at least you have the experience. You have done an RFQ, okay? You know some of these acronyms. You know some of the terminology. Week 4 took us into contract, but you must have a contract, but
it wouldn't save you.
It won't save you. Yeah, the contract will not save you. All right. So what if it won't save you? Why do you have a contract?
To prevent just a formal agreement to set expectations.
Yeah, it's just to set expectations. It's just trying to formalize what do you want and what does the supplier want in the agreement. You're just trying to remember you're working. This is not American contracting with another American company where they have the same jurisdiction, the same institutional support and legal background. All right. You're talking about cross-institutional arrangements here. All right. So therefore, that's why the contract will not save you unless in those very small instances where multinationals can actually write up the contract so specifically, and then they have a mountain of lawyers and resources to actually prosecute the contract if something goes wrong. But most SME startups don't even bother to do that. Okay, focus on risk mitigation in other ways. How can you do risk mitigation in other ways? And that's what we learned in the last part. What was that last part? The measurement and verification here. All right, that was it, right?
Product inspection and lab.
Yeah, so this is where you actually go, you visit, and you do the factory audit. All right, so you actually find out, is this supplier for real, right?
Yeah.
And then we showed you some data that actually had a correspondence between factory audit outcomes and product audit outcomes. As the factory audit outcome was higher, it was likely that the product audit outcome was going to be higher. Wow. And so that took us, and then I explained to you, we had this AQL, right? AQL, what do we mean by AQL?
QC.
QC, acceptable quality limit. So if we had 200 units and the tolerance of major rejects is 2.5, so therefore it was okay. It was okay that you had 10 units with major failures. Put your hand up. Is that okay for you? Hands up if it's not okay. It's not okay.
I think it depends on the value that you're putting up.
It does depend on a lot of things, but that's a good point. And would you like to expand on that?
I mean, it's still within the acceptable range, but it depends on how much value. I mean, it's a big value, of course, you feel like, you want lower effects. But if it's a small value, I think it's within the acceptable range, then you'll be like, okay.
I know, but if you're a startup and don't have much resources, it might not be okay. But okay, all right. So there's always contingencies you need to think about, but 10 out of 200 acceptable. So my advice to buyers is, throw out this chart and really aim for minimal, minor and major defects. You really got to maybe have even a tighter standard. My friend at Product IP, whom I'm speaking in one of their webinars in November, Product IP is a Dutch startup, and he was telling me these standards are not very tight at all. All right, major defects, you should be working on a 0.65 quality level. So what does that mean? It means that you should be working on 5 rather than 10. Are you with me here?
Yes.
All right. So if no more than 5. So if you get 6, don't ship. All right. So just because we said 2.5 and 4, it doesn't mean you can't work on a 0.65. It doesn't mean you can't tell your QC inspector to work on a 0.65 or a 1. Okay. All right. Good. Excellent. So this is practical stuff. Understand, just because the table's there doesn't mean you have to follow the table religiously. Most buyers are not really familiar with the AQL tables. So this is something. When we were at the week 7, then we started talking about driving innovation and change. And now we're talking about, okay, when we talk to consultants that go in, the change agents, then it's more like an onion. Because if we're going to develop suppliers and work with them for a long time, we need to really get to the red area if we want them to be sustainable over time. So again, we talk about sustainability. One of the key sustainability is going to become even more important in future renditions of this unit. But sustainability is really not just in making sure that the supplier has fewer rejects, but also that you're dealing with change management. You're dealing with the mindset of the owner. You're dealing with the skills of the people. You're trying to improve the skills of the people. All right. So the big word, ESG, sustainability, like these are words that are bandied around. I'm an accountant. I'm the head of accounting department, right? So we're all about reporting, ESG reporting, sustainability reporting. No, ESG, sustainability starts with operations. Okay. It starts with operation. It starts with minimizing waste. It starts with materials receiving. It's not about financial reporting. Financial reporting cannot fix waste in the organization, okay? A lot of greenwashing is going on. Greenwashing meaning companies are reporting they're doing stuff when they're not really doing it. Okay, so just keep that in mind. That was week 7, and then that enabled it during week 7. I also showed you that, okay, there's a lot of startups out there raising money on Kickstarter and Indiegogo. There were 2 groups that did present on that. And then we found that, well, they had problems too. But they didn't have the resources to do the traditional workaround that multinationals could work with. So startups worked on separation, the black box. Okay, they worked on customization. There were various strategies that startups took that enabled them to work around with minimal resources. And so these were the various solutions that we looked at in week 7. So a lot of practical stuff that you're seeing. And week 8 and week 9 is when we got to the big MMC, right? And that's where in week 8, we focused more on the supplier development side of this. And then week 9, we looked at the contracting or the formal control side. Because what was interesting was the big unknowns was we don't always know supply capacity. We don't always know the supply cost structure. We don't always know that. And on this side, there's also market forces. But the things that multinationals can work on is supply development and making sure that they're formally controlling the supplier. And that's where we learned about, okay, we could stage the suppliers, right? What do we mean by, okay, here's a question. What do we mean by staging the suppliers?
Having tiers, grading them, like to
All parts.
incentivize them to do better. So
Okay.
they have more access, different tier.
All right, okay. Yes, and so if they're at a certain level, then they are shared with more data, right? They get access to a longer pipeline. Their relationship becomes more strategic when they go to a higher level. All right, so that's a way of connecting loyalty with information sharing and developing the relationship. And a lot of multinationals are very successful at doing that. They all do that in certain ways. Okay, all right. And in this way, they were able to work out, manage reliability, supplier trust, and profitability and their responsiveness. Okay, so that's on the development side. Then on the contract incomplete side, you did realize that we talked about the fact that we're using scorecards. What do we mean by scorecards? Then we talked about technology, quality, service, delivery, cost. There was all these measures that are used and can get very confusing out there. So there were two groups that presented that week. One presented on HTC, the other one presented on PQI, right? PQI, right? And you got to see that even Apple takes things to a whole new level in the way they monitor their suppliers and prosecute various problems with the suppliers. So, and what you also learned was not all the multinationals had the same priority on the scorecard. All right, they don't always focus on technology to the same degree. They don't always focus on cost to the same degree. They're different, but they had the resources to formalize this arrangement. They have a procurement teams. They might have a quality team. They have an engineering team and design team, and then they have to talk together. And there was a story where there's one multinational in Shanghai that I visited, and every year they got Accenture in to talk to all the teams, the quality team, the production team, the design team, the procurement team, because they're always fighting. The role of the consultant was to get all of these teams onto the same page, and then they'll go and negotiate with the suppliers. The consultant's job wasn't to do the negotiation. The consultant's job was to deal with that the teams were not always in agreement. Okay? Humans in the organization creating problems. Put your hand up if you've seen that often. If you work in an organization, it's always around. Yes, I know. All right. So then we got onto the last one. Week 11. You're drowning in data. That was the big one. Remember, Andy, the big idea, drowning in data. What do we mean by drowning in data? What did Andrew explain that meant, oh, they're drowning in data? Who's drowning in data?
The supply chain industry.
The supply chain, the logistics. People are, there's a lot of documentation, but over documentation of many different processes. Andy talks about up to 30 different documents for a particular shipment. And there's only 2 of them that were common. What were those 2 common documents?
Bill of lading.
Yeah.
Oh.
Right, you got to be quick. And what was the second one?
Insurance.
It's good. It was something to do with
Safety
the
data sheets.
Yeah, the safety data sheets. All right. So, yeah. So there's only 2 common documents, and there was nothing common about everything else. So that's why I think the big challenge coming out of Andy's talk was what I circled in the red line. And that is, how can we better acquire data? if we can digitize the data acquisition, maybe we have a better chance to standardize the data. If we can standardize more, maybe we can have more common documentation. But data acquisition was the big challenge. All right. And like simple things like truck drivers having an app where they can push a button. And their idea is that a blue collar worker should not have to touch the smartphone, which has the app to do with the documentation, should not have to touch it more than 4 times for a particular transaction. If it's going to be 5 or 6 or 7, just simplify it. This is in part of log change design and what they're trying to put together. So this was a photo that I took from last week, but the data acquisition was the big idea. So that basically took us, and some examples of Maersk and their challenges that they had when they had some person that really shut down their whole data server. All right, but they happen to have one of their country offices to be off the power grid because that country's power wasn't that reliable, and that actually saved the whole global Maersk network, right? Because it wasn't it wasn't connected at the time the data breach occurred. So let me take, so all of you, you're very nice to stay in this unit. You could have changed after seeing me in the first week, or the second week, or the third week, or any other week you could have changed. All right. But you stayed with me. So I just want to thank you for that. Thank you for staying with me. But right, thank you. But how does this help you practically? Because I really didn't teach this out of a textbook, right? All right. Because I don't want you to have textbook knowledge. I want you, if you go into a job interview, you have more confidence because you know some of the terminology. All right. The beginning of understanding a new area is starting to know some terms. Then you can go to the next level, then the next level, then the next level. All right. So that gives you confidence. There's plenty of courses now. You can go into Coursera and study supply chain and then compare it with stuff that I taught you. And that enables you to go to the next level. And the cost of you doing in that Coursera is basically zero because you can audit the course. You don't have to pay the $20 a month for a certificate. If you want to, you can. All right. So these are things that you can do after you finish your MIB. All right. And number 2, you've got practical experience with sourcing. You know about RFQs now. You know about freight forwarding now. So if you go into a job interview in this area, at least there's something that you have some experience with. And it doesn't mean you can go, it doesn't mean you cannot go back and actually recreate that experience again. You can go and get another RFQ in practice for a job interview. All right, just to say that, I've got a few RFQs now, all right, under your belt. So these are things, if you've got a job interview, if it's in procurement, it's in the area, my biggest recommendation or my biggest advice to you is the weeks leading up to a job interview, you watch some videos so you are familiar again with particular terminology. You do a Coursera course. You go back and have a look at the RFQ. You go back and look at our videos in the MGM 5698, which you can also always get access to. They're always available for you. All right. And that, because you just got to get your mind in that terminology space. Because the worst thing that happens in a job interview is not the question about, why do you want this job? It's when they ask for a specific example that requires you to use some terminology, that requires you to understand some of the steps, and then you get stuck. All right. So there's a lot of material that you can go. All right. So I invited all of you. You can join our online video course, the China Sourcing Academy, which is in Udemy. That's free. You could join that. All right. I'll give you a code. I'll put it into WhatsApp for the next week. You can join that for free. What does that mean? Well, it's free forever as far as Udemy is alive. If Udemy doesn't close down, then it's there forever. Right? What does that mean? In 12 months or 18 months' time, we got a job interview. They're going to be asking me about contracting. They're going to ask me about IP protection. They're going to be I know Mike Bellamy, Neil's friend, has some videos on that in Udemy. So then you go and watch that. And then that makes you sharper at the time of the job interview. All right. So these are all good things that prepare you going forward. Network, strengthen your friendship with other students, because now you've worked in a group with people you like working with, or with people that I don't want to work with them again. But this helps you, give you confidence. And maybe you help each other when you're going for a job interview, because you might ask a buddy to quiz you in preparing yourself for a job interview. Okay. All right. And I mentioned China Sourcing Academy there. All right. So these are practical takeaways. Why do I say that? Because it's already been open and it goes right for another 1 or 2 weeks, I think, is the SETU scoring system. That means you can go online and then rate this unit. Okay, in terms of your learning, your personal learning experience. Every one of you are different. So you just go in and put the rating on what your experience has been in this unit. So that's a voluntary feedback that we do appreciate at Monash University, because we want to improve units. And you can write in how the unit can be improved also. Neil needs to assess better this way or that way. All right. You can always put that feedback in there, and that's always well taken and for improvement. All right. So that's just, I'm thinking in a nutshell, they're the big takeaways, I think, for this unit in terms of practical things that you can take away. We haven't finished because there's week 12 next week and we're going to do that. So we're going to have a break for about 5 minutes. When we come back, I want to go into some of the material tonight, but we're going to do it differently. I'm not going to just give a lecture. We're actually going to go through the questions that I asked you to go through. All right. And so then we're going to have interactive session where you can yell out the answers and we get the answers together. And that's how we're going to go through. All right. So I don't want to give a lecture on the material that's set for week 11. So let's just have a break for 5 minutes and we'll come back. Thank you.